Hello and welcome to today's episode of In Just One More Thing. Today we are going to be talking about tasers, and as a quick aside, the word taser is an acronym. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I encourage you to look up the origins of this name. It is a bizarre and more than slightly racist story around the development not only of the weapon, but its early uses for hunting elephants in Africa, and a very strange story about a guy named Tom Swift and his electric rifle. But back to today. Tasers have been an issue before the board for a couple of years now, following requests by the sheriff's office to be permitted to purchase these allegedly less lethal weapons. I have consistently opposed allowing the purchase of these weapons because I fundamentally do not believe that they promote or add to public safety, and in fact contain not only significant risks in their use, but also deter the use of other de-escalation tactics, particularly for people who are in crisis. So we're going to talk a little bit more later in this episode with Executive Director of the Asian Law Alliance, Richard Konda, who has been strongly advocating against tasers for quite a long time. You'll hear from him. He provided me and all of the other supervisors with this very thick binder of articles and studies documenting the dangers of using tasers. And you'll hear him recommend in our interview later that people who want more information take a look at the Reuters study on tasers, and we'll be sure to link that here. So stay with me. We will be back in a moment to talk more about this controversial weapon. We are back, and I am about to welcome and introduce to all of you Richard Konda, the Executive Director of the Asian Law Alliance, so stay tuned. And we are back. I am with Richard Konda, who is the Executive Director of the Asian Law Alliance. And Richard, thank you so much for talking with me. I wanted to bring you into the podcast specifically because you have been educating me for the last year and a half or so on the risks surrounding tasers, on some of the potential very real concerns, but this continues to be a conversation in our community. The sheriffs, deputies who are on the street patrolling, and the corrections officers who are in our jail are all very much in favor of acquiring what they are calling a less lethal weapon, and have put forth a number of arguments as to why these would be very helpful to them. So I'm going to ask you about some of their arguments, but I would welcome you to just kind of start with your own introduction, why this issue has become such a focus for yourself and for the Law Alliance.
You know, it really dates back quite a long time ago, and it dates back to a very sad incident involving a young Vietnamese mother by the name of Bích Cao Thị Tran. She was actually shot and killed by a San Jose police officer in 2003.
Oh.
And this is the case where she had a Vietnamese vegetable peeler in her hand, and then for whatever reason the officer believed that she was going to kill him, so he shot her, and she was dead. And after that, you know, the community was really concerned, couldn't understand why that happened.
Oh my God.
And so what happened was a group of us came together, and at that time we said, well, maybe if the police had some other method, maybe she wouldn't be dead now. And so honestly, at that time we actually said maybe the taser would be a good alternative.
Okay.
At that time we were just, everybody was just in shock and grief because of the loss. So we came out with that position. But following that, we actually did some intensive study. And I can remember we took like a whole Saturday morning or at least 3 or 4 hours really studying the issue. And then we said, wait a second. In that instance where the officer thinks his life is in danger, they're trained not to use anything else but deadly force. And so we actually switched our position and said, no, tasers are not the answer to saving her life. Really, the answer to saving her life would be de-escalation, mental health counseling, other things, because she was having some mental health issues. And she had those issues before, and actually another officer up in Fremont was able to talk her down and get her to calm down. And she lived following that encounter, as opposed to the San Jose police officer where she died.
So she had a previous law
had
enforcement
a
encounter.
number of them where she had a meltdown at a shopping center, was hospitalized. In that other instance in Fremont, she was like cutting up drapery in her bedroom, and it was just a very strange and difficult situation. But again, the officer stood on the ladder that was provided to him by the fire department and spoke to her in a very calm voice. And eventually, she put down the knife and was able to be hospitalized after that.
That's interesting how quickly this conversation segued into one of how law enforcement responds generally to people in crisis, as opposed to allegedly in the process of perpetrating a crime. So was the vision for tasers initially specifically focused on people in a mental health crisis?
No, I mean, it was just as another way to end the situation without the person dying. But again,
which is arguably a very good thing.
Right. However, when we really began to study the issue, and one of the things that really helped us understand it better, initially there was an Amnesty International report that really looked at the situation in a very deep way. But following that, there was a Reuters series, which I understand they took like 1.5 years to do this report. And as a result of that report, they uncovered 1,081 deaths that were related to tasers. And the unfortunate thing in that, again, is that I think the data is around 25% of those people who died had mental health issues. And in fact, now, a lot of the warnings that the Axon company has when they sell this product, they really say you can't use it in all of these situations, like person is pregnant, person maybe have health issues, have mental health issues. They're really saying you really shouldn't use it in that situation. But the police still use it in that way anyway.
But how do you even know if someone has a heart condition, if they're not visibly pregnant? Presumably you recognize a mental health crisis. But for example, somebody with developmental disabilities or autism or some other challenge that isn't physically manifesting but may preclude that person from following instructions, you can't see any of that.
And that's why, from our point of view, there's really no safe way to use this dangerous weapon. There isn't, because you just don't know what kind of health conditions a person might have. And so that's why we say tasers are deadly weapons and are lethal. And I don't know what
so is it playing the odds that if in these situations a law enforcement officer was going to otherwise use his gun, certainly the taser for all of the people that are shot by the gun are likely to die. A smaller percentage are likely to have a lethal response to tasers. So is that what less lethal means?
So what we want police to do, and maybe the problem is maybe police are being asked to respond to situations that really they're not equipped to handle.
And we know that.
That's probably the sticking point in terms of, especially somebody who's having a mental health crisis.
Right.
I don't know that it's fair to have a police officer respond to that.
Sure.
I think the county investing in alternative responses, I think, is a smart thing, is a humane thing, is the real best thing to do.
I couldn't agree more. It really does seem to be, particularly in the field, kind of an easy solution. We don't have to deal with this if we can just immobilize the person. Let's talk. I know we have a couple minutes before we need to wrap up, but I want to talk about the in custody situations. I've been able to view videos of very aggressive and potentially lethal fights in our jails, either between inmates or between inmates and correctional officers, that truly are horrific. And people in custody have gotten access or fashioned weapons that they're using. One person has stabbed another in multiple cases, and the pepper spray, which has been deployed and has its own other concerns, hasn't slowed down the violence, and requires a significant amount of kind of decontamination time and recovery time afterward. So the correctional officers are arguing that a taser will stop the violence much faster and doesn't require that kind of rehabilitation cleaning time. How do you respond to those correctional officers?
So again, I'll just strongly disagree with him. I think that the problem with these kind of fights is, I'm not sure that the taser makes it any safer. If there's somebody in the jail who's bonded and determined to do something, the outcome may be that the taser gets taken away from the officer and gets used on the officer. And I think that's really a dangerous situation. To introduce this into the jail, I think really doesn't make any sense at all.
Long term, what I'm thinking about is when we design a new facility, and I know there are a lot of complex issues around whether that should be done or not. But I think in general that design should be used to minimize those kinds of interactions when we know that people are in rival gangs or for some reason aren't safely placed together. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that they aren't crossing each other in a hallway or don't have to come into a yard space or an out of cell space at the same time. And right now our facilities, I think, really don't allow for that and exacerbate the problem. So I'll wrap up with this. The board, per my colleague's direction, I voted against this direction, just for the record, but my colleagues have asked the sheriff to come back in September with some other models of how this weapon may be safely utilized, if that's such a thing. And I expect that you and other advocates will come back and still say, no, don't do this. Is there something you want to close with for future advocacy, or as this issue continues to percolate?
I would just encourage people, if they have time, to really look at the Reuters study.
The Reuters study.
It's very eye-opening,
Okay.
and there's some tools within it where you can pull down information about, race of the person, whether they have a mental issue or not. And so I think that's what I would direct people to
Okay.
do. I think it's highly educational, it's interactive, and it's quite a bit of information, but I think it's very useful.
We will we'll link that study to the podcast information. And Richard, thank you so much. Thank you for being an educator. Thank you for being an advocate. And thank you for staying with this issue to help the policymakers get to the right decision. I appreciate your being here today.
Thank you very much, too.
Thank you for listening. We are back, and today's Just One More Thing is a little bit of personal history for Susan Ellenberg. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh is the home of Mr. Rogers, and I truly grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. His house was 2 streets behind mine. His boys, who were a little bit older than me, went to the same school, and Mr. Rogers truly infused my early life in terms of thinking about helpers in the community, about being a good neighbor, about being invested and caring for the people around you. My cousin Hedda Sherapin was his executive producer from the very beginning, so we always had this very strong personal connection with the show and with the man himself. I grew up in a neighborhood called Squirrel Hill, which unfortunately became infamous several years ago because it is the home of Tree of Life Synagogue, which unfortunately became the site of a mass murder of 11 Jewish worshipers who had come to synagogue on a Saturday morning. I knew a good number of them. I literally grew up across the street from Tree of Life when the murders were unfolding. All of the camera people were on the lawn of the house that I grew up in, so it had just a particularly horrible, wrenching feel. This was the safe and very warm and inclusive neighborhood that I grew up in. I left Pittsburgh in 1983 after I graduated from high school, and I went to New York City to attend Barnard College for undergraduate and then Columbia University Law School, obviously for law school. And I assumed I was an East Coast girl, that I would stay in New York, but I met a boy in law school from San Jose. He grew up in Willow Glen, went to Books and Markham and Willow Glen High School, and he was very clear, very inappropriately quickly, that he was coming back to San Jose. And if I was interested in him, I need to be interested in San Jose. We got married in Pittsburgh in 1990, moved to San Jose in 1991 to begin our legal careers, and the rest is history. That is just one more thing.